I told you to stay away from that alley, Eli. You hear me? Travis's voice cracked through the kitchen walls like a whip, sharp with frustration and years of disappointment. 18-year-old Eli didn't flinch. He just kept his eyes on the peeling linoleum floor, jaw clenched, hands buried in the pockets of his oversized denim jacket. He knew better than to argue. Not because Travis was right, but because arguing with a man who'd stopped listening years ago was like screaming into a canyon and waiting for compassion to echo back. It never did. Outside, the winter wind howled low and constant, pushing cold air through the cracks in the window frame. The furnace hadn't worked properly since September. Eli zipped his jacket and stepped out without another word. No one stopped him. They never did. The alley behind the old Crestwood grocery store had always looked like the place where hope went to die. Rusted shopping carts, busted pallets, and torn plastic bags fluttered like surrender flags in the wind. Most people crossed the street to avoid it. Eli walked into it like a familiar scar, ugly but known. He wasn't looking for anything. That was the strange part. Some part of him just needed the silence, the stillness, maybe even the ugliness. It was honest. That's when he saw her. At first he thought it was just a crumpled piece of garbage, a stained blanket bundled tightly under the graffiti-smeared brick wall beside the dumpster. But then the blanket shifted. Not with the wind, but with breath. He stepped closer, squinting. A German shepherd, curled so tightly into herself it was like she'd folded inwards to disappear. Her coat was matted with grime, her ribs pressing visibly through her fur, but her eyes, they were alert, wide, desperate. "Hey girl," Eli said softly, kneeling. "You okay?" The dog didn't move. Her breathing stayed shallow. She didn't growl, didn't whimper, just watched him, motionless. That's when he noticed the edge of the blanket moving on its own. No wind, no twitch from the dog. Something underneath was shifting. His breath caught in his throat. Slowly, carefully, Eli reached forward and peeled back the corner of the blanket. At first it was just damp cloth, and then something smaller, warmer. Living nestled against the German shepherd's belly were two newborn puppies, wriggling weakly, eyes still closed, fur damp and sticky with the mess of birth. Eli's heart sank. She wasn't just a stray. She was a mother, a starving one. "Jesus, double quotes," he whispered, voice trembling. "You've been out here with them the whole time." Still, the dog didn't react. It was as if all the strength she had left was being given to those tiny lives, as if moving or even blinking might risk breaking the fragile moment. Eli sat back on his heels, overwhelmed. The alley around him seemed to fall away. All he could see was this broken creature shielding something innocent, something unasked for and yet unimaginably precious. He didn't know why it hit him so hard, why his chest ached like he'd swallowed a lump of glass. Maybe because it reminded him of the time his mom had still been around, when she used to hold his head against her chest and hum, even when Travis was yelling in the next room, even when she was tired, even when she was scared. The shepherd was doing the same now, protecting, enduring. "All right," he said, his voice thick. "I'm not leaving you here, I swear." He pulled off his jacket, ignoring the cold, and gently laid it over the small pile. The mother flinched barely but didn't stop him. Her eyes followed his every move. "I know this doesn't fix anything," Eli murmured, "but it's better than nothing." He took out his cracked phone. No signal, no battery, typical. No one at home would help anyway. There was only one place he could think of: Mrs. Dalka. She lived 2 blocks over in a faded red house with wind chimes and a mailbox painted like a cow. She used to teach science before the school budget cuts. Now she fostered dogs, fixed up broken radios, and made soup for anyone who asked. She was odd but kind. Carefully, Eli lifted the entire bundle, mother pup's blanket, cradling it like something sacred. The shepherd didn't resist. She just laid her head against his arm, too weak to protest, too trusting maybe. The wind bit into his arms as he walked, but he didn't care. With every step he felt something shift in him, like for the first time in a long while, he was doing something that mattered, something real. By the time he knocked on Mrs. Dalka's door, his fingers were numb and his legs ached. But when the door opened and her kind, weathered face appeared, her eyes widened, not in confusion, but in quiet understanding. "Oh my," she breathed. "Come inside, child, hurry." The warmth inside hit him like a wave, but he didn't even notice. All he could see was the German shepherd in his arms, and the faint rise and fall of the blanket that covered her puppies. "She didn't cry," Eli said softly, more to himself than to her. "She didn't ask for help, she just waited." Mrs. Dalkin nodded gently, placing a hand on his back. Some of the strongest souls never make a sound, and in that quiet, as the door closed behind them, something in Eli's chest finally cracked open, not from the cold, but from the sudden, overwhelming heat of hope. He didn't know what came next, but he knew he wasn't alone in that alley anymore. Not anymore. The shepherd slept for nearly 4 hours straight, her body curled tightly around her puppies, as if even in rest she couldn't fully let go. Eli sat nearby, arms wrapped around his knees, eyes fixed on her shallow breathing. The room smelled like boiled herbs and something floral. Mrs. Dalka had brewed tea that neither of them drank. She moved softly around the room, placing towels, heating pads, and bowls of water without a single question. She's exhausted, she finally said, kneeling beside the mother dog. Starving too. If you hadn't brought her when you did. She didn't finish the sentence, just stroked the matted fur with quiet reverence. Eli nodded, throat tight. He hadn't realized until now how badly his hands were shaking, not from the cold but from the weight of everything. Seeing the dog, like that, alone in the alley, guarding life while she was barely clinging to it herself, it had cracked something in him. And now, sitting in this warm, strange home with soft music playing in the next room, he felt disoriented, like he'd stepped through a door into a world he didn't know existed. One where people still cared, where life still mattered. What's her name? Mrs. Dalka asked gently. I don't know, Eli said, then hesitated. She didn't have a collar, no tags. Mrs. Dalka smiled faintly. Then maybe she's waiting for you to name her. He looked at the shepherd again. Her ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice, but she didn't lift her head. One of the pups let out a small, high-pitched squeak. The mother shifted just enough to nudge it closer. Hazel, Eli said suddenly, her eyes ... They were the first thing I noticed. Like broken glass in sunlight. Hazel it is. Mrs. Dalka nodded. The quiet held for a while, heavy but safe. Then, as if sensing it was time, Hazel stirred. Her eyes blinked open, groggy, and bloodshot, but alert. She raised her head slowly, gaze flicking between Eli and the strange woman in the floral apron. She didn't growl, but her body went rigid for a moment, protective. She's still guarding them, Eli whispered, even now. Of course she is, Mrs. Dalka replied. That instinct never really leaves a mother. Eli didn't know why, but the words hit him harder than expected. His own mother had been gone 5 years, disappeared after a night of shouting with Travis, no notes, no goodbye. Just gone. And still, every now and then he found himself looking for her face, in crowds, listening for her voice in quiet rooms. That instinct never really left him either. As Hazel slowly sat up, she let out a low, gruff whine. One of her legs shook beneath her weight. She's in pain, Eli said, rising to kneel beside her. Something's wrong. Mrs. Dalka was already moving, checking Hazel's limbs gently, then pulling back the blanket a little further. What she found made her face pale. She's been injured, she said, voice strained. There's a deep gash near her belly. Looks like a termitove, been barbed wire or broken glass. It's infected. Eli's stomach dropped. She's hanging on, she said. But if we don't get her to a vet tonight, she won't make it through the next 24 hours. She gave everything to keep those pups alive. That wound's been there longer than I thought. Panic bloomed fast and hot in Eli's chest. He didn't have money. Travis barely paid for groceries, let alone anything extra. There was no way he could afford emergency care. He stood there, frozen, throat closing around words he couldn't form. I have some funds set aside, Mrs. Dalka said, reading his face, for rescues, but it won't cover everything, especially not a surgery. Eli looked at Hazel again. Her body shook with effort just to stay upright, yet she still kept one paw curled protectively around her puppies. Still watching him. I'll figure it out, Eli said. I'll find a way. I swear. He didn't wait. He took the stairs 2 at a time, bursting into the cold night with fire in his veins. He remembered the pawn shop on Hanover Street, the one that never asked questions. In his jacket pocket, he had a silver chain his mother left behind, a necklace he never wore, never touched. He ran the 5 blocks without stopping. By the time he returned an hour later, breathless and raw, Hazel was lying on her side again, her eyes closed but her ears flicking at the sound of the door. He held out a small wad of bills, $53 in change. It's all I could get, he said. Mrs. Dalka took it gently, not asking where it came from, just nodded once. It'll help. They made the call. The vet, Dr. Rivera, came to the house in scrubs and winter boots, his coat flapping behind him like a cape. He didn't speak much, just examined Hazel with calm hands and a deep frown. She's fighting, he said quietly. She's stronger than most. Then came the moment Eli hadn't expected, as Dr. Rivera turned Hazel gently onto her side. To clean the wound, something small and foreign slipped out from beneath the folds of the soiled blanket. Eli leaned in and froze. It wasn't a puppy, it was a piece of cloth, a strip of flannel, maybe from a torn shirt. On it, scribbled in rushed, shaky handwriting, were just 3 words. Please forgive me. Eli stared, breath gone. The writing wasn't faded, it was recent. Someone had left Hazel there knowing she was pregnant, injured, alone, and they had walked away anyway. He looked at the shepherd again, and something new unfolded inside him. Not just pity or compassion, rage, sadness, a resolve so sharp it felt like steel in his chest. Hazel opened her eyes then, just slightly, and for a split second Eli swore he saw a recognition, as if she knew what he'd read, as if some part of her still held on to the memory of whoever had abandoned her, and the moment they slipped that note into a blanket like it meant anything. I won't leave you, Eli whispered, voice steady now. No matter what they did, I'm not them. Hazel didn't move, but the faintest wag of her tail swept across the towel. Once, just once, and in that tiny, broken gesture, everything changed. Dr. Rivera worked through the night, Hazel never made a sound, not when the needle pierced her skin, not when the infected wound was flushed clean, not even when he had to stitch deep into torn muscle. Her strength frightened Eli. It wasn't defiance, it was surrender. The kind that comes from enduring so much for so long that pain becomes background noise. Her breathing wavered once, shallow and quick, and for a heart-stopping moment Eli thought she might be slipping. But then her head twitched toward her pups, and that single movement brought her back. Mrs. Dalka stayed close, eyes rimmed red behind her glasses, humming softly as she kept the room warm and the towels clean. No one spoke about the note again, not yet. The words burned quietly in Eli's pocket. Please forgive me. The cowardice of it made his hands tremble every time he touched the fabric. Forgiveness for what? Abandoning her while she was wounded and pregnant, leaving her to bleed in a cold alley while her puppies clung to life. But there was something else gnawing at him, something harder to name, a question without form. Whoever left that note didn't just walk away from a dog. They walked away from a life they were part of. Hazel had been someone's. She'd known love, or at least shelter. The way she responded to soft voices, how she didn't flinch at touch, how she waited without protest. It wasn't just survival, it was habit. Memory. By dawn, Hazel was stable. The pups nestled quietly at her belly, their tiny sides rising and falling like clockwork. Dr. Rivera stood up stiffly and gave Eli a nod that meant more than words. She had made it through the worst. For now, Eli didn't go home. He couldn't. Not when Travis would just glance at him and ask if he'd gotten himself arrested or infected. Instead, he took the guest blanket from the couch and lay curled up on the floor next to Hazel. She was sleeping again, her body draped protectively around the pups. He watched her chest rise and fall, slow and steady, and finally let sleep take him. When he awoke, the sun was high, casting warm light through the lace curtains. Mrs. Dalka sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, flipping through a folder of old adoption forms and rescue paperwork. She glanced up when he stirred. She made it, she said gently. She's strong. She shouldn't have had to be, Eli replied. His voice was hoarse, low. Mrs. Dalka nodded. That's true, but sometimes strength is the only thing left. He pulled the strip of flannel from his pocket and laid it on the table between them. Do you think we could find out who left her? Mrs. Dalka hesitated. Maybe, but are you sure you want to? It won't change what they did. I know, he said, but she deserves answers. Closure, maybe. And if someone out there used to care about her, really care, maybe they need to know she's alive. Or maybe they abandoned her for a reason that isn't what we think. A flicker of something approval or sorrow passed through Mrs. Dalka's eyes. I can call the shelter, she said. See if anyone reported a missing German Shepherd recently. I'll check nearby vet clinics too, in case she was registered. Over the next 2 days, Hazel regained some of her strength. She still slept most of the time, but she began eating again slowly, carefully, never more than she needed. The pups grew louder, blind eyes opening, squeaking and bumping into one another as they learned to crawl. Eli stayed by her side as often as he could. He even started writing down her feeding times and the pups' weights in a notebook. Mrs. Dalka gave him a look the first time he did it, one of quiet pride, but didn't say anything. She knew better than to make a moment to big. Then, on the third afternoon, the call came. It was a technician from a clinic 2 towns over. They had scanned a shepherd last fall, female. No chip, but a detailed file. The dog had been brought in by a girl named Lacy, 16, frail, and visibly scared. She said the dog was a stray she'd found but wouldn't explain more. She brought the dog in for vaccinations, paid in cash and left. The contact information was a Pazugo phone that no longer worked, but the file had photos. Eli stared at the screen when the email came through. The picture showed Hazel months ago, cleaner, healthier, still wary but with a spark in her eyes. Next to her, a girl sat cross-legged, face half turned from the camera. She was thin, pale, and had bruises on her wrist that hadn't been covered well enough by her hoodie. Something about the photo hollowed Eli out. She didn't abandon Hazel, he said slowly. She protected her, got her vaccinated, hid her, then left her with that note because she couldn't keep her anymore. Sounds like someone was trapped, Mrs. Dalka said. Maybe Hazel wasn't the only one. Eli felt it like a weight in his chest. How many people were out there hiding bruises behind hoodies, giving away the only love they had because the world wouldn't let them keep it? We have to find her, he said. Lacy, we can't leave it like this. Mrs. Dalka nodded. Then we'll try. That night, Eli sat beside Hazel again, watching the pups squirm in their sleep. He stroked her ear gently. She turned to look at him just for a second, and he knew she remembered, not just him, not just the alley, but her, the girl who'd loved her, the girl who had no one left to trust but a dog. Eli leaned closer, voice low. We're gonna find her, Hazel, for both of you. Hazel didn't move, didn't wag her tail, but her eyes stayed on his longer than they ever had before. And in that stillness, Eli understood something. Some animals aren't just rescued. Sometimes, they carry the last pieces of people who couldn't save themselves. The search for Lacy began with dead ends. No school records matched the name in the nearby districts, no recent runaway reports either. It was as if she had vanished. leaving behind only that clinic visit and the half-caught photograph where her eyes were turned away from the lens. As if already preparing to disappear, Eli spent hours online, combing missing persons databases and local Facebook groups, hoping to recognize her from a grainy post or a desperate comment thread. But nothing surfaced. She was smoke. Hazel had grown stronger. Each day brought a little more light back into her. She was walking again slowly but with intent, and she no longer flinched when someone reached to pet her. The pups had opened their eyes and begun exploring, stumbling into corners and yelping with surprise at their own limbs. Eli had started naming them. The smallest, with the white spot on her chest, he called Luna. The boldest one, always first to crawl out of the blanket pile, became Max. The third, quiet and observant, was Olive Dot. Despite the growing warmth inside the house, Eli's mind remained elsewhere. That strip of flannel still lived folded in his pocket, the words etched deeper in his thoughts than on the cloth itself. Please forgive me. Every time he reread them, he heard something different. Regret, desperation, maybe even a plea. That wasn't meant for Hazel at all. It wasn't until Mrs. Delka brought out an old tin box from her attic that things shifted. Inside, beneath faded photos and yellowed receipts, were stacks of local newspapers she'd saved over the years. People underestimate how much a small town forgets, she said. But ink has a longer memory than gossip. They found her. In the third paper from the bottom, a small article buried near the back of a year-old edition. Teen girl in protective custody after father's arrest, dog missing. The story was thin on details. It only mentioned that a sick girl had been taken into state care after her father was charged with domestic abuse and illegal breeding. The girl had refused to speak to reporters. Her name wasn't officially released, but the shelter volunteer quoted in the piece referred to her as Lacy M. Eli reread the article twice before letting the weight of it settle. Hazel hadn't been a stray. She'd been bred, used, possibly abused, and Lacy had risked everything to get her out, vaccinated her in secret, hid her away, and left her with the only thing she could give, a blanket and a note. The idea that Hazel had protected the pups even after that betrayal made sense now. She had learned what sacrifice looked like. She had learned it from the girl who loved her enough to disappear. Later that evening, while the house was quiet and the pups had worn themselves out and collapsed in a heap, Eli sat beside Hazel and gently ran a hand along her back. Her eyes followed him now, not out of fear, but trust. A bond had taken root, and neither of them questioned it anymore. I think she gave you up to save herself, he whispered. And maybe to save you too. Hazel's ears twitched, but she didn't move. I know what that feels like, Eli said. Losing someone to survival. He didn't mean to say more, but the words came anyway, about his mum, about the night she left, the silence she left behind, the way Travis never once looked for her, only muttered about ungrateful women and people who leave when things get hard. Hazel listened to the way only animals do, completely, without interruption, without judgment. And when he finished, she leaned her head against his knee, warm and steady. For the first time in years, Eli didn't feel like he was talking into a void. The next morning, Mrs. Dalka got a call. It was from a woman named Naomi who worked at a youth shelter in the city. She had seen the old article online after it resurfaced in a shared rescue group and recognized the name Lacy M. She couldn't give details, citing privacy policies, but her voice cracked when she heard about Hazel and the pups. She used to talk about that dog like it was her heartbeat. She said she thought Hazel didn't make it, that they'd taken her away and put her down. Eli felt something collapse in his chest. All this time, Lacy had believed Hazel was gone. Can she know, he asked, that Hazel's alive? That she made it? Naomi hesitated. I'll ask. She's in a delicate place, but yes, I think she needs to know. The waiting was unbearable. 2 days passed with no word. Eli couldn't eat properly. Every time the phone rang, he flinched. Hazel mirrored his restlessness, pacing at the door more than usual, watching him with alert, questioning eyes. And then, finally it came. Naomi called again. Her voice sounded tight with emotion. She wants to see her. She didn't believe me, until I showed her the photo you sent. She broke down. I haven't seen her cry in months. Eli couldn't breathe when tomorrow. The day passed like molasses. Eli barely slept. He woke up before dawn, cleaned Hazel's blanket twice, made sure the pups were safe and fed, and waited at the front window like a child expecting a miracle. Hazel stood beside him, tail low, eyes focused on the street like she knew something big was about to happen. And just after 10, a small blue sedan pulled up in front of the house. Eli stepped outside as the passenger door opened. A girl stepped out, thinner than in the photo, wearing a faded green hoodie, sleeves pulled past her hands. Her hair was tied in a messy knot, and she looked like she hadn't slept in a week. But her eyes, those soft, tired eyes, lit up the moment they landed on Hazel. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She just knelt on the lawn, hands trembling. Hazel stared for a heartbeat longer, and then she moved. The broken, battered, near-dead dog Eli had found in an alley sprinted across the grass with a force he'd never seen before. She collided into the girl's arms with a whimper so deep, so raw it sounded like grief turned inside out. Lacy buried her face in Hazel's neck. I thought I lost you, she whispered, again and again, like a prayer unspoken for too long. And Hazel brave, silent Hazel finally cried, not with sound, but with the way she shook, leaned, and refused to let go in that moment. Eli knew. Some goodbyes aren't the end. Some are just the beginning of finding your way home. The house felt different after Lacy arrived, quieter but not in a lonely way. It was the kind of quiet that follows a storm, the hush of something broken being gently pieced back together. Hazel never left her side, not even for a moment. She curled beside Lacy at night, resting her head on the girl's lap while the pups nestled close. Lacy barely spoke at first. Her voice, when it came, was soft and fragile, like a bird unused to singing. Eli didn't press her for answers. He didn't need them. He saw it in the way she touched Hazel's face, like memorizing something she never thought she'd see again. He saw it in the way Hazel looked at her, that silent recognition of someone who'd been through hell and still came back, scarred but breathing. They stayed in the guest room, and Mrs. Dalker made space in her small world without question. She put out extra towels, made tea no one drank, and quietly rearranged the room to fit a crate for the pups once they started wandering. Eli helped where he could, feeding the dogs, running errands, reading the same 3 books to the puppies like they were toddlers in daycare. It became a rhythm, strange but comforting. And for the first time in a long while, the days didn't feel like something to survive. It was on a gray afternoon, with rain tapping softly on the windows, that Lacy finally told the whole story. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug that had long gone cold. Hazel lay at her feet, the pups in a playpen nearby, yipping quietly as they tried to chew on each other's ears. "My dad ran a backyard breeding operation," she said, eyes fixed on the swirling steam that no longer rose from her tea. "German shepherds, mostly. He used Hazel like a machine. First heat, first litter, no rest between. When she got pregnant again and started limping, he said he'd dump her. Said she was bad stock. Eli didn't move, didn't breathe, stole some cash, took her to the vet," she continued, "paid cash, told them she was a stray. I thought maybe I could hide her until I turned 18, but he found out, beat me bad. I ran that night. Had nowhere to go. I thought if I left her wrapped up with a note, maybe someone would care. She waited for you," Eli said quietly, "even after everything. She waited." Lacy wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt, a tired smile breaking through. "I used to tell her when things got really bad, that if I didn't make it, she had to. That she had to carry the good parts of us forward. That maybe someone kind would find her." "She did," Mrs. Dalker said from the sink. "And he did." Eli glanced away, heart suddenly too big for his chest. He hadn't expected to matter in this story, not really. He was just a kid who walked into an alley and decided not to walk away. But hearing it now, hearing how close Hazel had come to vanishing like so many others, he realized that one moment of compassion had changed more than just one life. The next week brought more decisions. Naomi, the shelter worker, helped Lacy begin paperwork for emancipation. There were court appointments ahead, therapy sessions, case reviews, but she wanted to stay. She wanted to finish school. She wanted, most of all, to be with Hazel. Eli was outside one afternoon fixing the latch on the back gate when Lacy stepped onto the porch beside him. Hazel followed close, the pups tumbling after like shadows. "I want to adopt them," she said. "All 3. You sure?" Eli asked, standing up. "That's a lot. Puppies aren't exactly low maintenance, I'm sure," she said. "Hazel deserves to see them grow up, and I think I do too." He smiled. "You're braver than I'll ever be." Lacy looked at him for a long moment. "No, not that you showed up when no one else did. You didn't know me. You didn't know her, and you still stayed." He didn't know how to answer that, so he just nodded and went back to fixing the gate. Grateful, the rain hid the sting in his eyes. By the end of the month, a small celebration took place in the backyard. It wasn't much, just Mrs. Dalker, peach cobbler, mismatched plates, and a few friends from the shelter who had helped quietly behind the scenes. Lacy signed the last of the adoption papers at the garden table. Hazel lay beneath her chair, the pups napping in a sun patch near the flower beds. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the evening light turned golden, Eli sat beside the old wooden fence and watched the little family settle into itself. He didn't feel like an outsider, not anymore. It wasn't blood, but he was part of the story, the thread that had somehow held everything together until healing could take root. Lacy joined him after a while, 2 mugs in hand. "One's just hot chocolate," she said. "Figured you'd prefer that to herbal." He took the mug, grateful. "Thanks." They sat in silence, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. Only the wind moved, rustling the leaves overhead. "I think people like us," she said after a while, "the ones who lose things early. We learn how to see the invisible stuff." "What do you mean?" "We notice the ones who are struggling, the dogs no one else sees, the quiet kids who sit alone, because we know what it feels like to be forgotten." Eli nodded. "But we also know what it feels like to be found." They sat a little longer, sipping quietly, watching the last of the light fade into the trees. Hazel looked up then, from where she rested among her pups. She stretched, yawned, and padded slowly across the yard to where they sat. Without hesitation, she rested her head on both their knees, eyes closing in perfect peace. And that was when Eli understood. The alley wasn't the beginning of Hazel's the story. It was the ending of a cruel chapter, one written in silence, survival, and heartbreak. But the real story began here, among people who saw her, who stayed, who chose to love when it would have been easier to walk away. Because sometimes, the smallest decision, a walk down a grimy alley, a whispered promise to a wounded dog, a strip of fabric with 3 desperate words is enough to start a whole new life. And sometimes, the ones who need saving the most, save us right back.